And we're joined now live here in the studio by presumably somewhat tired Scott Morrison, the Social Services Minister. Thanks for your company.
Very sparky, very sparky.
Well, let's get straight into the election. Well, I feel tired. Let's get straight into the election results. Any federal implications in this result from your perspective?
No. What this was is a win for policy over populism. Bill Shorten says that, you can take any road. Well, you can't take the low road that Luke Foley took at this election. That's pretty clear, and I think that should be a message for Bill Shorten too, that fear campaigns and populist reactionary positions from the Labor Party just don't get you there, and I think that's a good outcome. The other really good outcome is on the economy. I mean, Mike Baird's win was critical for the national economy. The infrastructure agenda is very important to our economy. It is driving the New South Wales economy. It will driving the national economy. So that's a great win for the national economy.
Is the lesson, though, for any political party that you need to be upfront with voters? Mike Baird was prepared to take his electricity privatisation reform to this election, and he's been rewarded with a very sizable majority out of it.
Look, I think there's all of that, but even more than that, I'd say what Mike Baird did is he sold the benefits of what he was doing. He didn't sell the features, he sold the benefits. And there is a dividend for the policy, which is a tough policy that he was taking to the people in New South Wales. And that was roads, it was infrastructure, it was economic growth, it was jobs. That was his purpose, that was his mission. And the features argument, which is what is always a little hostage to the fear campaigns, which the unions and Labor Party didn't hold back from, I think this gives all of us who are interested in constructive reform and policy and change for the better, which delivers real benefits, real optimism.
But we were told at the start of this election campaign that Tony Abbott's unpopularity would prejudice the re-election of Mike Baird. So what is the takeout for Tony Abbott?
Well, the takeout is that good, strong policy, as we've been seeking to pursue at a federal level, taking people with you and in explaining, I think, the benefits of those policies, will get support from the Australian people. But as I said, the message here is also for Bill Shorten, and that is the low road of reactionary oppositionist politics with no benefits to the Australian people when your alternative is putting forward a positive agenda is not a road that the Australian people, and particularly here in New South Wales, they'll back.
Well, you dodged the question of Abbott's leadership, so let me ask you directly, do you believe that Tony Abbott will lead the government to the next election?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Why are you so confident, given the polls?
Well, I'm confident because of the plan we've got. We're going into a budget where we are bringing down a small business package, a jobs package and a families package. And we're also a government that learns. I mean, the definition of a bad government is one that doesn't learn from its time in office. That's what happened under the previous government. They just wouldn't get it. Now, we're a government that has listened carefully. We've made a number of changes of recent times. And the Prime Minister has also, I think, significantly altered his approach as to how we're governing and how we're interacting. And I think that's been a very positive process. And I think, if we were having this conversation 8 weeks ago, Paul, I think the situation was very different. And, I mean, a year ago, the New South Wales Liberal Party was in pretty crook shape. And last night, they won a thumping election, the second worst result for Labor in its history, worse even than the 1988 result when Nick Greiner was elected. I mean, Labor barely managed to pick the lower-hanging fruit in the election yesterday.
Well, let's just go to one of the lessons from this election, and that is that Mike Baird put an unpopular reform agenda to the people and won. Will the Abbott government be prepared to go to the next election putting its own reform agenda to the people?
What we're prepared to do, and I think this is an answer of yes to you on that, and that is we'll be prepared to continue to sell the benefits of the policies that we're advocating. Now, we went to the last election.
Well, that dodges the issue.
No, I don't think it does.
I asked you whether you'd take a reform agenda to the next election.
We took a reform agenda to the last election. We'll continue to take a reform agenda forward.
Well, it wasn't a sufficient agenda, obviously.
Well, I disagree, Paul. We said we'd get rid of the carbon tax, gone. Mining tax, gone. We said we'd get rid of the votes, and we've done all of that. We said we would fix the budget, and this is a discussion Peter and I had last night, where I think Peter's view is you have to actually table the legislation before you actually have an election in order to seek a mandate.
My view is you just can't go on television the night before the election and rule out every element that requires cuts to fix the budget at the same time as promising to fix the budget. They're just inconsistent.
Well, we have a mandate, I believe, to get on and fix the budget, and we'll be putting those policies again to the budget this year, and incremental, strong, modest reform, but reform that will take the Australian people with us, and reform that can appreciate the parliament in which we sit. Now, you've got to be pragmatists about those sorts of things. I believe that's what we're trying to do. We have learnt strong lessons from our first 18 months in government, but I would say at the same time that there have been significant achievements in our first 18 months in government. The first budget, for all its critics, still managed to halve the trajectory of Labor's debt in one budget.
But at the heart of Paul Kelly's question really is that you've got this comparison. You've got in New South Wales Mike Baird that laid it all out, largely electricity privatisation, and then brought the voters with him. On your side, the lessons that are being learned, so-called, are being learned as you retreat from policy positions and don't even, in many cases, even put them to the Senate, much less put them to the voters at the next election. Are we going to see a large package of reform that you've, in a very gutsy political move, take to the next election
Well,
with
Peter,
your 97?
What I just said to you is we're bringing down a budget which will have a small business package, which will have a jobs package, and which will have a families package.
But these are all spending things.
Well, the packages will be announced in due course. These are key areas where we need to improve things for Australian families, get small business moving, because they're the principal employers and they're drivers of the economy, and we've got to get people into work. I want to see more people on the payrolls of employers rather than on the welfare payroll of the taxpayer. 8 out of 10 income taxpayers go to work every single day, and that just pays the welfare bill. Now, that is $150 billion a year, and we need to ensure that we're getting more people on employers' payrolls and not on the taxpayers' payroll for welfare.
Mr Morrison, can I just take you back to the state election for a moment?
Sure.
Clearly, Mike Baird has had a very compelling and convincing election victory, yet there was a significant swing to the opposition in the Hunter, the Central Coast, parts of Western Sydney. Labor looks to claim perhaps 14 seats. So there are reasons why there was a swing against the state government. What do you think, though, the causes of that swing was? Labor would argue, obviously, it's privatisation campaign, but they would also argue the unpopularity of the federal government, which showed up in their research as a factor swinging votes.
Well, I think that's just nonsense, the last point, that there was no federal implication in all of this, and I think the fact that Labor soft-pedalled so heavily on those issues, particularly in the last week or so, demonstrated that. But what Labor did was focused on the low-hanging fruit opportunities for them on the Central Coast and the Hunter, where there were very specific issues around ICAC and things of that nature. They were always going to be soft areas for the Liberal Party last night, and those seats were pretty much put in the Labor column pretty much from the outset of the campaign. So Labor was able to realise a fairly obvious opportunity for them there in very specific circumstances. I disagree with you on Western Sydney. We had a swing towards us in Parramatta. We won the seat of Penrith again under some pretty strong opposition. We did very well in southwestern Sydney. I mean, in particular, places like East Hills, a stunning result for Glenn Brooks. Holsworthy, a stunning result for Melanie Gibbons. And then to hold seats like Oatley, which were on a knife edge after the last election, I think demonstrated that, the value of quality candidates. And for the National Party, the result in Monero was absolutely stunning.
Well, can I ask about the National Party? Because the National Party have lost 2 seats on the North Coast to the Greens. I think that shows that the Greens are a problem for Labor in the inner city and a problem clearly for the Conservative forces outside of the major cities. Is that the way you read it?
I think the Greens issue is now a major problem for Labor, and it will continue to be a sinkhole for Labor as it drives and draws Labor further and further to the left. I suspect there'll be a petition to get Anthony Albanese to run again in the seat of Grayndler, minus Anthony Albanese in the seat of Grayndler at the next federal election, based on what we saw last night. Then there'll be a Green MP coming into the federal parliament in an inner city Sydney seat, and the same would apply for Tanya, but I don't think she has any plans not to run. But frankly, and when we saw Lindsay Tanner go in the seat of Melbourne, we saw it happen. Sure. Now, that is the dynamic, and that's Labor's problem, and Labor have created that problem. Yesterday, Labor and the Greens were in an alliance. They were in a preference swap arrangement, and they were as tight as a drum.
Sure, I agree with that, but what about the North Coast of New South Wales, where seats have been lost from the Nationals to the Greens?
Well, I think Andy Green made this point well. I mean, the New South Wales coast, particularly the North Coast, traditionally dairy farms, things like that, has changed. It's been a massive change in that area. The interesting thing is it's gone to the Greens, not to Labor, and I think that we're always going to have difficulties with the transformational demographic and social change on the North Coast. But Labor have not been the beneficiaries. The Greens have been the beneficiaries, and what that means for Labor, I think, is a very, very difficult
can
question.
I just ask just one quick question about the North Coast? What is your position on coal seam gas? Because that was clearly a big vote changer in that region that saw the Nationals lose 2 seats.
Well, look, on those sort of issues, I'm going to defer to Barnaby Joyce and Ian Macfarlane. Other than to say this, it's predominantly dealt with as a state issue. But what I found surprising about the CSCG result yesterday in the North Coast is the Labor Party scattered these licences for CSG around the state like confetti, and were in part beneficiaries of a swing to them in some of those seats for that. So look, I think this is a highly impassioned issue, and in some of these seats where there's swings, there is no coal seam gas mining going on. So I think it is an issue which is capturing public attention, and there's a lot of uncertainty about it, and the job of politicians, I think, is to really try and bring some stability into this debate. It's really a tug of war between energy policy and environmental policy, not unlike with open cut coal mines, and it is a very difficult issue for politicians on both sides of politics at a state and federal level.
Is that why you don't want to give us a position? I mean, are you in essence in favour of
I'm not the Minister for Agriculture, and I'm not the Minister for Industry, so I don't have a habit of traversing other people's portfolios. I stick to my own. But what I'm saying is it is a very vexed issue, and I think that is displayed in the sort of results that we saw last night. But on that basis, where it was also very strong was in the seat of Goulburn. I was only down there and around the seat of Wallandilly a week or so ago. Very impassioned views around that issue in that part of New South Wales, and Prue Goward, a stunning result for her last night.
We just go back to Mike Baird. What's the key to his success?
Well, as I said, he's popular, but he's not a populist. I think that's key to it. Mike Baird is a great bloke, and when people meet him, they understand that. He comes from a great political family and a great family.
Do you think popularity in a leader is important without being a populist?
I think what's important is that someone has conviction and a clear plan and can carry it through. But I keep making this point. What Mike Baird did, he just didn't sell a change. He sold the benefits of change. The benefits of change, and the benefits of a balanced budget, the benefits of a jobs package, the benefits of a small business package, and the benefits of a family package is what the government, our government at a federal level, will be focusing very firmly on. We can all look at what the sausage machine of that change is and get very involved in that, but the benefits of change are important.
Okay, well, that's the mistake you've made, isn't it? I mean, you're sort of implicitly admitting what I was going to ask you, and that is, what is the lesson for the Abbott government? Surely the lesson is that so far, at least in the first part of the term, it didn't sell the benefits of change.
Oh, look, I think that's a fair point, Paul. I think there was an assumption after the last federal election that there was an appreciation of the benefits of having a balanced budget after the fiscal, arsonists that the Labor Party were in government. They left us with this terrible mess. I mean, they were the people who ordered the meal and then did a runner on the bill, and we've been left with it on any number of issues.
You guys have had dessert, though, let's be honest.
We've had dessert.
Well, there's a lot of extra spending that's been baked into the budget as well.
No, I don't accept that, Peter. I know you have that view, as do others, but no, I don't accept that. I mean, our budget policy is based fully on offsets. You know how tough Matthias Coleman is. You want to bring a proposal to the table, like I did, with reversing the cuts to homelessness funding, $230 million over 2 years, then I had to find offsets for that in my portfolio, and that's what's gone through the budget process.
Now, let's just take your formula about the Premier. He's popular, but he's not a populist. Does that apply to Tony Abbott?
No, I don't think Tony would pretend he's popular, and he's certainly not a populist. Tony is someone...
So that means he can't produce the Mike Baird technique?
No, I don't think that's the right analysis, Paul. I think every individual is different. Mike Baird has that winning smile and that incredible natural charm,
Does Tony
which only a few people are blessed with.
Tony Abbott's around from the Campbell Newman Cup.
I mean, look, I've seen other charismatic politicians, people of great capacity as well, who haven't been able to succeed in politics. I remember back in 2003, John Brogden was one of the strongest political talents I ever saw, but frankly in 2003 we got a result which was not unlike what Labor got last night, pretty much the same. I would put Labor's result last night more in the context of where we were in the early 2000s, not in the late 2000s.
At the time in 2003 you said that result was a good stepping stone to government. You were the state director.
It was the first time that we had frankly not lost a seat in Torrens to Labor in quite a long time around the country. So it was a turning point for us at the time. But look, it was still a very, very long way back. And what I think happened last night is, Luke Foley was making the point about where they'll be in 4 years. Well, if he continues to go down the reactionary path of voting against everything the New South Wales people voted for yesterday, then I think he'll get a message again at the next election. But what it was for Mike Baird is this is a platform now for Mike Baird's government. He finished Barry O'Farrell's first term last night, and now the Baird term commences in earnest. And he is going back after the ground that we lost last night, and I think that shows strength and confidence.
All right, stay with us. We're going to take a break. We'll no doubt come back to issues around the New South Wales election from a Labor perspective when we have the Senator Sam Dastyari join us on the panel. But when we come back from this break, we'll move into federal political issues and discuss the all-important policy area of Scott Morrison's social security. Back in a moment.
Now for True Value Solar's Aussie All-Rounder. 7 panels, 3 kilowatt inverter and 2-year platinum service for just $16.32. Lowest prices guaranteed. If we can't beat a price, we'll pay your next month's power bill. Ends Thursday, call 13 Solar.
How private is your private hospital cover? Is it this private? Or this private? Be nice if it were this private. See if your cover measures up. Call Medibank today for a free health cover health check. Switch by March 31 and get 1 month free. Getting the health cover that's right for you. All part of Generation Better.
It's easy to create my beautiful website with Wix.
Let's go again.
If only everything in business was as easy as Wix. Go to Wix.com and create your stunning website today. It's free.
There comes a time in everyone's life when you just want more. Like an exquisitely crafted German-engineered car, unparalleled performance, exactingly precise. Desire for such things often outpaces one's means, until now.
Nice. New Jetta.
Yep.
The new Jetta, from only $21,990 drive away. Engineered for drivers, priced for everyone.
Volkswagen. Das Auto.
How private is your private hospital cover? Is it this private? Or this private? Be nice if it were this private. See if your cover measures up. Call Medibank today for a free health cover health check. Switch by March 31 and get 1 month free. Getting the health cover that's right for you. All part of Generation Better.
Anton's Animal Kingdom.
Anton!
How may I help you?
Help!
Be quiet.
Quiet!
Silence.
If only everything was as easy as creating your website with Wix. Go to Wix.com today. It's free.
Meet Robert Potter. He creates mountain bike trails deep in the Tasmanian wilderness. There's just some places he couldn't go without his Ford Ranger. Technology like hill descent control makes it possible. Technology that Hilux doesn't have. For Rob, it's all about helping people see just how great the outdoors can be. Ford Ranger with hill descent control technology.
Welcome back. You're watching Australian Agenda, where Troy Bramston, Paul Kelly and I are speaking to Scott Morrison. We've largely been talking about the New South Wales election, but let's move into your portfolio area if we can. I want to talk about this idea of whether or not your changes to the pension constitute a cut or not. Now, Labor is saying that they constitute a cut, but obviously pensions continue to rise, but the level of the indexation is what you're looking to bring down. That's an acceptable summary, isn't it?
Well, 2 points I'll make. You're right, pensions are going up. They've gone up by more than 6% since the last election, and importantly, they've gone up higher than wages growth, but also they have gone up, and we've maintained the carbon tax compensation, which, let's not forget, is worth $14.10 a fortnight to a single pensioner and $21.20 for a couple's pensioner. So they got rid of the carbon tax, we got rid of the carbon tax, and we kept the compensation in that. Now, a cut of $14.10 to the pension for a single pensioner, real time right now, would be a significant issue. We kept that. The debate we're having now, whether it's on indexation or anything else, is about what this long-term sustainability is of the pension and these types of payments more broadly. Now, the intergenerational report shows that by the end of that projection period, that outlays in that area will be 3.6% of GDP if we do nothing, 2.7% if we make a change. Now, in today's dollar terms, that is $14.4 billion or thereabouts in today's budget. Now, that would wipe out our contribution to the NDIS. That is double.
But wouldn't the best way,
what the childcare package would be, just even what it is today. So our argument is we've got to have a conversation about the sustainability of these payments. I'm not wedded, and the government is not wedded to a particular way we do that. We have a measure on the table, sure, but the Labor Party is saying it's okay. There's no need to change anything. There's no need to even turn up to a debate. And that's the same policy reactionary approach we saw rejected last night in New South Wales.
If the Labor Party ends up staying in that position in the lead up to the next election, but if they stay there in the lead up to the next election, then that clearly has.
But would you agree that's their position?
At the moment, I would agree it is. But this is the year of ideas, Scott Morrison. So
it's
you never know.
It's a bit of a wasteland from the Labor Party's point of view. We've sent out the probe. No life on planet ideas with
But here's what a lot of people think should happen with the pension. They don't agree with reducing the level of indexation, effectively reducing the level of indexation. They think eligibility to the pension is what needs to change, but you've already ruled that out.
No, I haven't. What I've said is the family home, the principal place of residence, would not be in the assets test. But there are two ways you can deal with this issue over time. Obviously, there is a way you deal with a different rate of increase over time, and let's be clear what that current proposal is, and that is to use the CPI indexation as a bridge from the current arrangements to arrangements that would track average weekly earnings over time. That is what's currently on the table with a 3-year adequacy review. So the pension would still go up every 6 months, and then on top of that there's the safety net of an adequacy review. But look, this is a conversation that will continue. These changes wouldn't take effect till 2017, so there's plenty of time. But the other point I was going to make is that whether it's CODA or National Seniors or ACOS, they will make the argument, as they have, about the broader issue of eligibility and taper rates on assets and things of that nature for people's current resources.
And you're open to change there?
We're open to finding a way to make the pension sustainable, because we don't think that having a situation that leaves you not being able to absorb the NDIS and the Commonwealth's contribution is an outcome that we think is acceptable, and we have to get to a better place on this. We're prepared to have that discussion.
But are you making any progress? I mean, you've sent the message, you've sent the message again today, you're prepared to negotiate, you're prepared to sit down, you're prepared to look at different options. Are you making any progress at all with the Senate or with the crossbenchers in the Senate?
Well, I'm a patient man, Paul, and
are you making any progress?
At this stage, there's been no great reaction to what we've put forward, but we are patient because these measures are for the long term. These measures come into effect where we would like to have something in place by 2017. Now, that gives us a long time to work through this debate. We just had a discussion about the importance of taking people with you and the benefits of these sorts of changes, and I think that's exactly the situation we're in right now. And so whether it's on issues of how pension is indexed for the future, or whether it's on issues of how it's constructed and its eligibility, I think these issues have all been put on the table in the debate. We're part of that debate. The Labor Party is not part of that debate because they're happy to have a situation where $14.4 billion or thereabouts would be loaded onto the budget with no offsets, which could, as I said at the press club a few weeks ago, the welfare budget will eat the budget. It'll overwhelm the budget unless we have some sensible management of it into the future.
OK, well, this leads to the critical question. Given that you are convinced the present situation is not sustainable, if at the end of the day the crossbenchers don't come to the party and you can't cut a deal, do you stand by the announced reform, and do you put the announced reform with the new indexation measure to the Parliament?
Well, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves.
No, we're not getting ahead of ourselves,
we are,
because
Paul,
this is the announced government policy. We can't be getting ahead of ourselves. It's a highly pertinent question.
This is the proposal that's on the table at the moment. And what I'm inviting crossbenchers, in fact the Labor Party, they're still welcome to come to the debate if they want to, about what is the long-term sustainability of these outlays. And we're happy to engage on that across a whole range of issues. And I've had much better engagement with stakeholders like ACOS and National Seniors and the Council of the Ageing, who are much prepared to engage in the sorts of changes that can be done. Now, obviously the principal place of residence is off the table in terms of being in the assets test. But something that
Why is that? I mean, you can live in a $5 million home and still get the pension.
Well, you tell me, if the Valuer General in New South Wales or anywhere else in the country struggles to get the unimproved value of land right every time to set rates and other things, how on earth do you think they're going to go around and get a proper assessment on the commercial value of everybody's house?
But is that the only reason that you're against it?
No, I have a more fundamental objection to it, because that is the principal place of residence and has a special place in our society and in people's lives and the way they've invested in it. But I think there are just practical issues there. I mean, this is always put up and no one thinks about, as we think about, what's the practical implementations of implementing that policy? I said at the press club, I think it's just a dumb idea, so I don't intend to pursue it. But that doesn't mean that you can work off the principle which says, as people age, they have assets and they have resources beyond their principal place of residence. And the welfare system is about helping people who need it, not people who think they're entitled to it. And there's a big difference between those two things.
Yeah, but can we come back to the fundamental question? Now, you've made it clear before, you've made it clear publicly that you don't like the idea of putting measures to the Senate unless you're pretty confident they're going to pass the Senate, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
Is that the principle that you will apply in relation to this welfare indexation change? Is that the principle that you'll live by?
I've always said on the welfare indexation issue that I'm open to other alternatives.
I know that.
And I am, and I believe we will get to a position where we will have better alternatives on this, and the combination of them, will be worked out over the next 18 months or so. But what we believe taking forward, and what we will take forward to the next election, is our ongoing plans for a sustainable welfare system. And we'll have that. The Labor Party
take to the next election the declared policy that's now on the table.
That's not what I said, Paul. What I said is we're still working through that and how that survives and in what form it looks like. And what we're saying as a government is we're open to discussion, we're open to change, we're open to negotiation, we're open to compromise. And that's the process I'm engaged in. This is not some sort of ideological pursuit. This is a practical question about how you manage the sustainability of the welfare net of future generations of Australians.
So do you accept that this could well be an election issue front and centre in 2016?
No, I don't believe it will be, because I believe that
Why? Because you can't get through... I mean, you don't seem to be able to get any compromise through the Parliament.
Perhaps I have greater confidence in our ability and in my ability to ensure we can get to a better place than we're at today, and it's based on my faith on some of those crossbenchers, and perhaps a vain hope that the Labor Party might understand that the welfare net that we want to be sustainable at current times on current projections won't be, and that they will have a concern about not just the current set of beneficiaries for the welfare system, but future beneficiaries who will depend on it. And I wouldn't like this to be an issue of which there is great polarity at the next election. I would prefer to us all to be on the same page in this. And I think what happened yesterday is the fear campaign of negative reactionary politics, which is exactly what we're seeing from the Labor Party on the pension. The Labor Party's policy on the pension is to scare pensioners. They've got no plan to ensure the sustainability of the pension. They've got no plan to actually pay for the NDIS. The NDIS is only funded 40% by the levy. Now, where they think the balance of that is going to come from and how the welfare system will absorb the NDIS, the most important reform to our welfare system, I think, in a generation, that's the question for Labor. We will have a plan to fund that and to make sure it's there. At the moment, Labor has a gaping black hole.
But if you're looking to try to woo the crossbenchers in the Senate to support your legislation or any other government legislation, how does calling them feral fit into that tactical approach?
Well, I'm not going to get into that, Peter. I know you get very excited about the rhetoric of all of these things. I think the Prime Minister was making a comment about a whole range of issues and some frustrations we have. But it's up to all of us to continue to engage, not just with the crossbench. I don't know why the Labor Party are constantly given a leave pass on these debates. It is the year of the ideas And the best they've come up with is a jobs tax. Now, I'm not surprised that the only idea they've come up with is a tax, but a tax that basically wouldn't pay for 1 year of the National Affordable Housing Agreement. They haven't turned up to the table on ideas or reform. And Bill Shorten's, I think, biggest problem after last night and of the events of the last 8 weeks is the Labor Party will be asking, has Bill Shorten peaked? Has Bill Shorten peaked? That's his worst nightmare, and I don't think he's sleeping so well at the moment.
Can I ask about your crossbench negotiations you've just been referring to, Mr Morrison? Have you met with all the crossbenchers, and how have you found them in discussions in person or on the phone?
Look, I've always had a very good relationship with the crossbenchers. There's, in particular, people like Nick Xenophon and Ricky Muir, who were very pivotal to the decision on the temporary protection visas last year, but equally with David Leyonhjelm and Bob Day. I've had very good discussions with. I'll be catching up with Nick next week when I'm in South Australia. And the discussion we're having is actually about, let's get an understanding of what the problem is and whether we can agree that there is a problem about the sustainability of our welfare system and whether that is on how we get young people into work. And I had a great passionate conversation, particularly with Ricky, about getting young people into work. That is an issue he feels very strongly about. Bob Day had a great conversation about families and how we get families into work and staying in work. And more generally, we've been talking about how we get older people as they age to continue where they're healthy, to stay in work and to use their own resources as much as possible so we can help those who need it most. So we're talking about what the problem is and what the issues are. Then you move to the issue of our respective views of what the measures are to address those problems. But at the moment, I think we need to come to terms with the problem that needs to be solved, and that's the focus of the conversation at the moment.
But have you been able to meet or talk with all of the crossbenchers?
I haven't met with Jackie Lambierzet on this, and I haven't met with Glenn after the changes. I mean, they've been quite focused on some of the other measures going through the Senate. It was a very busy last parliamentary session, and as I said, I've got patience on this. There is time on this. This is not an issue that needs to be resolved in the next 10 minutes. And I continue to work it through because, we're not walking away from the need to make changes that produce a sustainable safety net for future Australians. We're not walking away from that. Now, measures themselves, they're the features, the benefits are the things that I remain absolutely committed to, and that is a welfare system that future generations can rely on. Because what we're facing now, people leaving school today, people being born today, they cannot be sure there'll be an age pension when they come to that position in life if we keep going the way we are. And that is an unthinkable proposition, I think, for most Australians. But I think we need to get a better understanding of that risk. We always look at who's better off or worse off in the next 5 minutes when it comes to political analysis of policy in this country. Well, what about the next generation? Will they be better off or worse off? They're the questions we're asking as a government.
Well, can I ask you about your welfare reform package and I guess also your proposed changes to the pension scheme, although they're yet to be finalised. Are you looking at these two measures, welfare reform and the pension, as revenue measures for the government that could make savings in the budget to help bring the budget back to surplus?
Well, that is an outcome, but it's not the driving issue. It's about how you can get all of these welfare payments in terms of their eligibility and their focus tight and being able to be accommodated by their budget over the long term. I mean, I mentioned it before. The difference between 3.6% of GDP and 2.7% of GDP is what the competing trajectories are on these payments. Labor's approach is 3.6%, and that is $14.4 billion higher than what our trajectory is based on the current things that are on the table. Now, I think that is worth having a look at and worth committing to try and solve over the longer term. But on pensions, I mean, what we've seen from Bill Shorten is they came up with the rating of pensioners' bank accounts, the trousering of their bank accounts, and we've reversed that, and I think that combined with the pension increases we've seen since the election should demonstrate, and I think it does, our good faith that we want to ensure pensioners have a sustainable, adequate payment that supports them into retirement, but it's got to go to those who need it most.
The government has sent conflicting messages about the return to surplus. What is the policy on the surplus?
That we will return to surplus as soon as we can.
Do you agree with Tony Abbott's statement that that a deficit of between 50 and 60% of GDP is not too bad at all?
Well, I don't agree that was what his statement was, Paul.
That's what he said.
No, the context of what he said is there are two trajectories that have come out of the last budget. Our legislated measures get us to about 50% of where Labor's trajectory debt was going, which was 120% of GDP, by the way. Now, that's Bill Shorten's plan. 120% of GDP being of debt to GDP. Our current trajectory on legislated measures is half that, and he said there was more to do, and we want it to get to that 0%. That's where we want the trajectory to head, and that's what our measures are designed to do. Now, the benefits of that to the economy, the benefits of that to the sustainability of payments, the benefits of that to small business and families are extreme. And that's the message that we obviously have the challenge to sell between now and the next election.
How important is it in political terms, do you think, for the government to look credible on the surplus?
Well, it's obviously important. Fiscal responsibility is critical to any government, and the coalition governments have a strong track record on these issues, and I believe we're living up to that track record. But how soon we get there while you maintain the growth in the economy and that you move incrementally in a measured way and consistently and methodically towards that goal is what this government is doing. And we have a plan to do that. And that was demonstrated in the forward estimates from last year's budget, will be demonstrated in the forward estimates of this year's budget. Bill Shorten's plan, 120% of debt to GDP. That's his plan. And his festival of no ideas has come up with nothing, frankly, not surprisingly, to address that issue.
But you're in power now, and when you came into power, irrespective of what you have to do to change the trajectory, debt to GDP in the low teens, and now Tony Abbott talking about how it mightn't be too bad a result if it gets to 50%.
But Peter, I've got to stop you there, because I know this keeps being repeated, that somehow there's this suggestion that we think that's an acceptable outcome, and the Prime Minister does. He does not think that. And you can say it as often as you like, but he does not think that. The government does not think that. 50% is not an acceptable outcome, and it's not the outcome we're seeking. The outcome we're seeking is better than that, and the outcome that is being blocked by the Parliament currently is that better outcome. Now, we remain committed to getting the better outcome. We remain committed to it.
But he did say that 50 to 60% is a pretty good result compared to other countries.
What he was talking about was compared to the trajectory of 120% of debt to GDP. Now, I'm not sure you would think that half of 120% is not a better outcome than 120%. I mean, surely you would agree with that. Now, I'm not about to call you fiscally irresponsible. Heaven forbid.
But the issue, though, I guess, is when or at what point in time is the government going to decide that it is on its watch that debt is continuing to mount? It can be like turning around a cruise ship. It can take a long time to do. But initially, when Joe Hockey came in and he put down MyEFO at the end of 2013, he said this is the moment in time at which there's no more excuses. We had the Prime Minister at one point say that we will get back to broad balance in 2017. Now that date has crept out. You're getting blocked in the Senate and so forth. There's issues there. But at what point do you stop just saying Labor's responsible for 120% of debt to GDP when they left office it was in the low teens?
Well, the politics is always a relative business. It's a choice. It's always a choice, and there are two choices on offer here, and ours is a lower debt future for Australia. That's the clear outtake of the positions of both the opposition and the government today. And we are in government, and we are working to bring down the trajectory of that debt. But as I said earlier in the interview, Labor ordered the meal and then ran off when the cheque came. They did a runner on the bill. Now, we're having to deal with the consequences of that, whether it's ensuring that we can absorb the NDIS, the most significant generational reform to our welfare system that we've seen, and we are committed to getting that absorbable and sustainable in the budget. But to not be able to address any other issues of government outlays because of the political reactionary approach of the Labor Party, which we saw rejected in New South Wales last night. My message to Bill Shorten is the low road's not good enough, Bill. It's not good enough. That was rejected in New South Wales last night. This government's got a plan to reduce the trajectory of debt, to support families, small business and create jobs, and I encourage him to stop taking the opportunist approach that we've seen him take. People deserve better than that, and they'll get it from our government.
Scott Morrison, thanks for joining us on Australian Agenda.
Thanks very much, Peter.
Stay with us here on the program for a Labor perspective, both on the New South Wales election results as well as the state of things federally in the countdown to the May budget. We'll be joined by Senator Sam Dastyari. Back in a moment.